Number 2. Hello, everybody. So this talk, we're slightly limited on microphones. So when it comes to questions, which it will do quite rapidly, I'm going to steal one of the microphones off the speakers, and that means I'll have to do a bit of passing it on. So when you get to ask a question, it'd be really helpful if you ask it of a specific person, because we'll know then who should answer. It makes it a bit easier. Welcome, and Rosie Boycott, Nick Barnard, Corisande Albert, and William Kendall. Round of applause, please, ladies and gentlemen.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you all very much for coming. I don't know if the rather extraordinary water demonstration has finished outside, but I certainly thought that was quite amazing. What we're going to be talking about in the next hour is if you're a local producer or a producer, sorry, it's very echoey, producer of any kind, what do you do with your produce and how do you sell it and market it without necessarily having to be a victim of the supermarket chain where you just hand over your carrot or your apple or whatever it has to be? And all three of our speakers have come at this same problem from different ways. William has just been discussing this on the stage, so I think I'll come to you last. So, Nick, do you want to tell us how you developed Root Health and where you began? And
Yes, thank you. Rosie, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm unique on this platform, aside from Rosie and not being a farmer and also being truly urban. Whether I like it or not. Our business, Root Health, is based in Fulham, is 14 years old now, and we began with a naive concept of producing the world's finest muesli, which was naive, and if it really, rather like putting on an extraordinary conference like this, if you knew what it entailed building such an event like this, you would be perhaps shy of it. And just in the same way as beginning a business, that naivety is all. And based in Fulham, we were looking really at an urban landscape. So we were blessed in the sense that we were already surrounded by consumers. And this gave, if we had started in Abergavenny or we'd started in Galloway, we wouldn't be here today more than likely. And particularly from 14 years ago, when the landscape of access to what is in effect quality food has changed, we were a lonely voice, crying from the door or shouting from the door to have people come in and join us on our food journey. So I have this unique position amongst the panel of being a brand holder and a sales and marketing enterprise based in a city. So my understanding and my experiences are based on an intimate relationship with retailers right at the coalface, largely in an urban environment. Okay, so can we just stick with this one more minute? I mean, where do you make your muesli, just before we leave you and go on to Corisande? Yes, I mean, we're still a small family business with a loud voice. And we began in Wandsworth in southwest London with the ultimate naivety, an old filing cabinet box, one of those plastic boxes, with oats, organic oats from Scotland, in fact, and the ingredients sourced organically and mixing to this recipe that any of you can imitate. And were you physically yourself doing the mixing? I was physically chopping the prunes. My tenosynovitis is still very severe. Chopping prunes is a fiasco. And also there isn't a machine to chop prunes. It gums them up immediately. So we started with a muesli that was also naive in the sense that it had 25 ingredients. So most mueslis have 12, 9, 11 ingredients. So we overdid it. We over-indulged because we were creating this new world for us which felt completely natural, which is that you can create nutrient-dense food that is also flavorsome. Because up until that time, what you seen recently, we have this convergence between brown food, otherwise known as health food, brown packaged food, and sexy food, otherwise known as delicatessen. And we took the route that felt completely natural to us, which is that you can have both. So there I was mixing, tubbing, all the things that William talked about. I caught a snippet of it. A friend did the design, not the design you see today, but our original, slightly less communicative or clear design. And there was no obstacle because you knew that you were making great food that you would feed your family, you fed yourself to meet a need. And I knew where I was getting everything from. And so we were continuously mixing in these boxes. And then I was walking around to the various neighborhood delicatessens and going to what was then the emerging organic stores and selling in by hand. So you just sold. You just went there and but the primary insight for us was taste. If it doesn't taste great as a finished food, they won't buy it again. And so we spent our first, we began with £1,000 each. There were 4 of us. So we spent all the money on aprons and tasting episodes, going out and tasting and asking for feedback and creating that relationship, that abiding relationship that continues to this day.
That's so interesting, because in effect what you were doing was doing a local economy in the city.
Exactly right. We were, and I still think of ourselves in Rude Health, despite the fact that we're now available widely and rather vicariously, really, is that we were always inclusive, but we were also starting from what was in effect a local hub.
Yeah.
But we didn't. I knew that it would be important for us to be available where people shop, which leads us on to the sort of germ of this, which is where did 14 years ago people shop for their muesli and for their breakfast cereals, which of course 92% of them are doing it in supermarkets. And of course that's a symptom of the malaise of the relationship with food rather than any sort of statement around the nature of supermarkets. So we began as a micro-business, and I see ourselves to this day, and we welcome small businesses, we nurture small businesses that come to us, and we help them. I see ourselves with our vitality as being a micro-business.
That's so great. So, Corisande, there's all sorts of, even though this is a city business, taste, locality, having something that is special to you. So tell us about your grass-fed beef.
Yes, well, hello, and I feel very humbled being sitting in between these two sales and marketing and branding gurus, because I'm much more like most of you in that I haven't done any of that. I don't do enough of it, and I need to, and I'm very keen to learn from them. Just to give you a little bit of a backstory on me and Cabalva Farm, we're in the beautiful Welsh borders between Herefordshire and Powys. And it's a 600-acre farm. It's a stock farm. We have cattle and sheep. We have quite a lot of woodland. We've diversified. We've got holiday cottages and peri-pears and a ceramic studio. But what I'm here, I think, today talking about is our grass-fed beef, which we have developed supplying direct to restaurants. I did not come at this from an economic reason, I'm afraid to say, certainly, and not from an environmental reason, I'm sorry to say. Most of my career has been as a documentary filmmaker, so I am drawn to stories and authentic stories. And when I took over managing the farm from my mother, who took it over from her grandmother, it's a bit of a matriarchal thing going on, I imagined the story of taking the animals to market. And I have lovely black and white photographs of my grandmother with her pedigree Hereford bulls at Hereford Market. But I found the reality of that story 8 years ago very different, and I was rather uncomfortable with it, because we would look after the animals from birth, and then they'd go off in the stock trailer. Often I wouldn't know who they were sold to. I would just have a check. And yes, that is very easy, and I think a lot of, understandably, a lot of farmers, that's where they want to stop the relationship with their product. But I was uncomfortable, and I wanted to have more control and know where they went, how they were slaughtered, how they were butchered, how long they were hung, and to know actually where they were finally ended up on whose plate. So little by little, and this is going back 6 years ago, I started, because I have je suis gourmande, I have a great interest in restaurants and in chefs, and I slowly began to talk, and I realized there was a big disconnect between where animals leave the farm and these wonderful farmers who know absolutely when the brisket shows that the animal is fat and ready for slaughter, and the chef who can butcher a flat iron steak like nobody's business, but doesn't really understand what happens before the animal is slaughtered. So I've been, in my tiny little way, really interested in that journey. I'm on that journey. I don't have all the answers. There are lots of pluses. The satisfaction of going in and being told by, a great chef that they love your beef, your product, is real job satisfaction. But there are lots of challenges too, and I'm sure we'll talk about them because there are some similarities between the three of us, but that's...
So how does it work financially?
Well, I'm trying to be quite tough with myself on saying I don't think that the way to make the beef to restaurants, whether they're to the B2C beef boxes or B2B going to wholesale to restaurants, can't sort of rely on the livestock business that you would get anyway going through a conventional market. So I take as my ground point what I would get for that animal if I took it to Hereford Market. And then I look at my associates, because you can increase your gross margin more than double, but you have all the associated costs, and it's factoring in all those costs, and this is where these guys are actually listening to Farm Drop yesterday, the logistics and the delivery and the butchery and the slaughtery, when those all add up, the profit, it's not the land of milk and honey that I think a lot of farmers, and I initially was hoping for. It's a tough margin. I think it's a possible margin. I think the difficulty is, as a farmers and starting up, is putting in your own time. So I'm not sure, hands up, that I have clocked all my hours, and particularly with the restaurant business, where you have chefs that are very... they're a bit like the directors that I used to deal with in documentary film. They need a lot of care and attention.
Unreliable.
And they're a little unreliable. You're quite right. But I think so. I mean, that's part of the journey. I absolutely believe that it can be profitable. But I think there are lots of ways in which we can work together to make that easier. And I think, obviously, I came thinking it would be wonderful if my grass-fed beef, because of the way, and I've listened to lots of people, and you all know as much as me, that you can achieve this fabulous product with less inputs, and it should be less expensive. However, it's hard to translate that at the moment because people don't pay enough for their beef.
William, in your talk, you've diversified a lot. I mean, you started off with all the Cawston stuff, but also you've done eggs, you've done this and that, you did green and blacks. Why have you not done grass-fed beef, given that we're at a no-till?
Well,
is there some reason? I mean...
Not really. I mean, I come from as you've heard several times now, I mean, we used to have cattle on the farm just over the hill there, and we went out of it because it became very easy just to make money from subsidies. So we grew, my family in Bedfordshire were growing probably 20 or 30 crops when I was growing up. We had every type of livestock, and we employed lots of people, and I didn't look at the numbers because I was a teenager. But all I can tell you is it was a very vibrant community, and it clearly worked because we stayed in business. And it just got easier and easier to grow wheat and oilseed rape and take the easy money. And so gradually everything worked. We got a fantastic. When I was a teenager, I was feeding cattle in the yards in the winter when they were brought in. We had 6 different farmsteads, and we would move from one to the next. By the time you got to the last one, we would be around to the next one to put straw in it. And then we got the EU paid for a fantastic cattle barn, which cut a lot of cost out. And a year later, 2 years later, we went out of cattle because it was, we did turkeys. Well, when we were a little bit older, we did turkeys, farm gate turkeys, which were completely delicious. And by then, I was doing Covent Garden Soup, but I was selling our turkeys to all my friends in London. And then we stopped doing that because the price of wheat went up, and it was too easy. So, I mean, the point about there is no land of milk and honey. Farming was never easy. The good farmers stayed in business and worked flat out, but they got a lot out of it. There are no easy returns. My easy returns are, I have diversified my life. I have got involved in food businesses which are disconnected from my farming life. So that's where I make my returns. And my farming makes enough of a return to justify employing people and doing what farming has always done.
So really, the way you describe it, your farming has been hugely dictated by the subsidy system or the way that the government has or hasn't supported particular ways forward.
Well, it hasn't not my farming, but my family farming. The
Farming.
farming that I ran away from near here. I mean, I now farm in Suffolk with
Yeah.
my wife, and we're trying to ignore subsidies. We do take the subsidies, and we're very grateful. But and the minister hasn't reassured me. You know,
No.
I've always felt
Sorry
that there was
about
going
that.
to be a time that that the subsidies are not going to be there, and so I've tried to make the subsidy a smaller part of our overall revenue, which we have done in Suffolk. And in doing it, we've made the farm much more complicated and we've added cost, but we are in a much better position to be resilient in a subsidy-free...
Because you have several things. So if you were Corisande and you have a grass-fed beef, I mean, it always strikes me that your chain is quite vulnerable. I mean, in that you're dependent on restaurants and it's quite complicated to get it there and you have to drive the carcass around the country and, you know, it's a labour of love rather than a labour of economics.
Well, I think it can be both. I think that there is something it is difficult, and everybody has told me not, well, a lot of people, a lot of my neighbouring farmers, the butchers, some of the larger abattoirs have said, you know, this is too much hard work, it won't work. And I find that rather exciting because it is new and different and challenging. But I think we as farmers should be able to control the whole process. And as I think, William, you were saying, why should all the people in between, quite a few of those people are the very people who are saying, Corisande, it's too hard, don't do it. It's perfectly possible to do. It is hard, and there is no land of milk and honey. I think with beef, with red meat, one of the problems is the seasonality of it. If it's 100% grass-fed beef, unless you break the 30-month BSE rule and sell cow meat, so that is a challenge. The restaurants are unpredictable, and they do need to be worked with, but as they become more, we have chefs come to the farm and they then begin to understand the process that we go through as farmers, and that we can't have an order change. If we have a 28-day hung carcass, to change your order 14 days before delivery is just not possible. So I think a lot of it is about education. What I love about it is the directness. It's me, my local abattoir, and long may he survive, and the restaurant, and that's very exciting because it feels very, very real. And the other thing I'd say is that with social media, it's very easy to be able to contact, and for people that are doing, I just do one family and friends beef box, but I think that's an area where I'm interested in looking into.
Want to give to Nick?
Yes, I mean, the resonance, ironically, between what you've described and how we've built Root Health is astonishing. I mean, I'd like to pick upon 2 points here, if I may. One is price making and price taking, and the other is resilient and sustainable relationships with customers. And we have not grown at Root Health over 14 years. Investors come to me and say, you're still a bit slow growing and small, aren't you? And I'm thinking that's rather like a farm, really. You can't grow nature artificially. You can't just suddenly squeeze more out of nature. And what I found is that by never compromising, by setting the price, by being a price maker, I turn off a lot of customers, but I encourage those who understand and respect what we do. But it's very hard work. The easy wins are not there. And secondly, for the sustainable relationships that you're talking about, now you have a myriad of sustainable relationships you'd like to encourage. And in fact, today I was just doing some buying from Nick there, for our cafe in London. There I was, like 2 Barrow boys, trading some beef to be on our big green egg in the cafe in Fulham next week. You're constantly aware of opportunities, and it's this micromanagement of the opportunities that is so exciting. But the irony is that not many of us are built to work like this. Or indeed, we've become imbued with the sense that there's far too many easy wins. You had easy wins that changed your whole cultural temperament. Your whole agricultural landscape changed through easy wins. And these have been short-term, naive relationship with nature, which is why we're here today and yesterday.
Brilliant.
I mean, I don't think I can really add to any of that. I mean, I think this idea that I completely agree that it's a slow burn. I mean, I do actually think probably what you're doing is the hardest thing of all. Selling red meat into a system which is dysfunctional is so the fact that it's working for you and that it's hard. I mean, don't give up. But I think the beast itself with lots of different bits to it, even if it was a lamb, it's slightly easier, I think. So my experience of talking to friends who have been in the supplying beef and the way that you're doing is similar. But I think we are still in a strange phase of food consumption. The point of my talk earlier was really around the stories we have to tell as producers do resonate with a very large chunk of the population.
Yes.
So that has to give us comfort. That has to give us a clue. But the system that's in front of us, the supermarketing system, is not designed to help us. So even when Waitrose come along and say, we want local food because our customers keep telling us they want food, they don't really know how to do it. The whole supermarketing system is not around that. It's about doing away with that. So they're really fighting their own model. And that's probably why they're not succeeding at the moment, because the customer is saying one thing and their model is telling them to do something else. So why organisations like Farm Drop are
Doing well.
Well, they're doing well, and I've been talking to somebody in the front row who's there are other people who are trying to connect using modern technology, we the farmers, with the growing number of people out there who want something that is different, that's not available.
But what always really irritates me is when you go into supermarkets and you see like very commercially bought sausages, say, that have been made from Danish pig or Polish pig, and they have on them a package which has a cartoon of a farmer leaning over a gate and a kind of sunset going down. And that is a direct lie, actually, about how that pig has been produced. And when you're actually doing it properly, like Corisande or various people, that must make you really angry. And I don't understand why this doesn't stop, because it's fraud.
One of the things that I think that we have to be very honest about is that I don't think we as farmers often help, but we don't help this problem enough, because firstly we're quite resistant to working together, and that's been a tradition. And I thought when I came in, I'm a woman, we're all going to be able to share the machinery, and it is. I've become more understanding. So take my beef to restaurants. I've spent 6 years building up these relationships. I'm very protective of them, and I can understand in the way that somebody's protective of their tractor, that we have to find a way that we can work together. So that's the first thing, while protecting each other's business and brands. And secondly, I think that we have to find a better way to communicate. And with my kind of documentary filmmaking hat on, I feel that there is some fantastic work that's being done. The PFLA, I know that are doing great work. I was really impressed by the Farm Drop concept. But we do get stuck in semantics sometimes about what, particularly I know about the red meat industry, what is pasture fed and what is we sort of got caught between, we don't want to do down anyone else, but what are we really, and I think we need as a group to have a stronger, more positive message that that everyone can get on board, including the vegans, and everyone can sort of, and I think and the onus is on us to find the right words to communicate that.
So it is very much the power of story, and just at the end of your talk, you had that story about your eggs and how you differentiated your eggs from another person's eggs. So just tell it, for anyone who wasn't there, and maybe you could all just come down the line and talk about the power of story, and then we'll get somebody else's stories in. That was very interesting, your egg saga.
Well, I mean, we produce eggs organically on a small farm. I mean, our hens are, they really are free range. They go everywhere. They graze herbal lays with lots of different herbs in them. They can go into the hedgerows. We've got thousands of them, so it's quite complicated. It's quite expensive to do it. So, we are not the most efficient organic egg producer. I mean, most organic eggs come from a pen house, which is probably up to 4,000 birds in one house. I mean, ours, the maximum is 300. We can pull our houses around the fields, and so they are fertilizing the fields. They go between rows of trees as part of an agroforestry scheme. So, back to your picture on the tin or on the box, we actually don't put that picture. We've got a Matthew Rice illustration, but that picture would be a genuine one, and it does annoy me when I see hens, lovely hens clucking around in deep grass, because most hen
it's
systems
just not
don't
true.
have that. They're in a stationary large building, and if they come outside at all, which they probably don't, I mean they're allowed outside because they're free range, but mostly they don't come out. So I find that annoying, but I get over that. I know that our eggs taste delicious, and they taste delicious because of what our hens are eating. And I know that I can communicate that because I've got a brand, and I know that I can sell through people who help me deliver that story. And I charge a price, the point you're making, I charge the price that we need to charge to make a very inefficient system. Well, what conventional agriculture would say is a very inefficient system, to make it efficient. So the only thing that I'm efficient on is marketing, sales and marketing. Everything else is inefficient, because the inefficiency is what people want to pay for.
But you go direct, don't you? So there's no middleman taking money.
Well, there's the retailer. I mean, I'm in Waitrose, but
Okay.
I'm not going through. If you want to get into Waitrose with your eggs, normally you have to go through Stonegate, who are a thoroughly reputable wholesaler of eggs, who I suspect make very thin margins, but because
Deal with such a lot.
Waitrose are so big, to get a continuous supply of eggs to all of their shops, they rely on somebody else to do it, and that organisation is the organisation that does the negotiating, and it's not Waitrose or Tesco who come and beat you up as the farmer. It's the people in the middle, because they're so big. It's a very, very inefficient way of you getting eggs from me.
Yes.
And we have now technology which can break down that inefficiency.
So, Nick, you go straight, don't you? Or do you, in fact, use your, whatever the cereal equivalent of the Eggman?
We have such a diversity of routes to market. It's rather mind-boggling, which again sort of defeats all of the logic around, your highly trained business experts. Focus, specialize, focus, specialize. We have a scattergun principle, so we're available throughout all of the organic wholesalers through the country, and we're also trying to create what I declared a moment ago, is try to actually be price makers in our relationships with all retailers, and also to have sustainable relationships, and that's been the slowest and biggest learning. But before I say any more, I just want to say, Corisande, I think you're underselling yourself. I think you're great at marketing, you're rubbish at selling, because your website is terrific. What you do and your energy on your website is, what you really should be saying is, we produce the finest beef, people will be salivating, they'll be queuing up. So, this is the extraordinary achievement that you've had, is to be able to farm and to have that quality of comms. All we do is comms. All we do is communicate. And that, is hard enough as it is in this day and age. And our, what we hadn't realized when we set up 14 years ago, is that our secret is in our name. The name Root Health is a lifestyle, it's an attitude. Mm-hmm. It's an attitude to life. We're all here because we're actually in Root Health. Because if we weren't in Root Health, we would be ignoring this train coming up behind us, which is about nature not being able to sustain our farming practices and our consumer practices of the last 3 generations. And so being in Root Health is an attitude, and I'm appealing to that all the time. The nuances around that are raising awareness, because to be in Root Health is to be up for life. Mm-hmm. And being up for life, you need to be fed with the right nutritional substances, otherwise known as food, to be able to deal with being so energized. And so, to me, what we're doing and what you're doing and what William's doing is playing to our strengths. But I want to encourage all of you. I, like William, with his chickens and his eggs, you, Corisande, with your chefs and the yearning that they have for your beef, I feel it when I go out and do workshops, whether it's sauerkraut workshops, or it's making ghee, or it's doing a raw milk tutored tasting. The yearning I feel for people to have a more conscious relationship with food is stunningly exciting. And we should do all we can to play to that coming awareness, that consciousness. It's very exciting.
Thank you. That's so great. No, that's fine. That's fine. Because now we can do questions. That's such a nice moment. So we'd love to hear either questions or people's own stories about what they're doing in this type of thing, getting to market. There's a guy right here. Thank you.
Thank you. It's Graham from Willis from CPRE. Corisande, you mentioned farmers working together more, and I suppose what I wonder is whether the current model of farmers working in clusters to do the agriculture couldn't be developed to work so Prince Charles has said the same thing, turned into helping farmers do the marketing and what is clearly emerging, having a brand. And do you see that as possible? And I suppose one of the risks is there isn't enough market out there to sort of take all the product from lots of farmers doing this. Is it a very narrow part of the market that could do that?
I think that's such an interesting area, and my gut feel is that one of the exciting things, just like as Nick said, people want a relationship with a closer relationship with their food. We have an opportunity to have a closer relationship with the urban public, with our farms, and we've got to do that on a small individual farm-to-farm basis. So I think there could be something about cooperation on the logistical, the non-farm aspects of getting to the end customer. I think then we might be less cautious about sharing. I also think that if we could, it just has to happen slowly. There has to be some groups that start locally, and you just like any relationship, you share a little bit and you see how it goes, and then you share a little bit more, and then hopefully over time there would be, because I think unless we work together, it won't work. It won't be sustainable long term for everyone.
Yes, hello. A question for Nick. Are you able to source all the ingredients for your cereals from the UK?
No. A muesli with, if you took out the raisins and all the soft fruits, I mean, it would be impossible to produce what people would normally expect to find in a muesli. So we will buy, it's actually a rather good story. We realized through mouthfeel that if we sourced our oats from organic farmers and had them milled in Scotland, they had a completely different mouthfeel to the oats that we would source from Cheshire, from UK farmers, from English farmers rather. And that's because the mill, and this gives you the idea of the nuance in also my expertise in oats, it's really rather terrifying, is that you can, the same specification, the same industrial, or the same standard specification gives you a completely different oat. And likewise, when we choose our raisins and our sultanas and our currants and our nuts, we are also looking for specific profiles in terms of size or succulence, and no added sulfur dioxide, no added other sweeteners within there, juices and so on. And I have an unofficial, but a very official and rigorous rule that I rant about continuously, is that we will be buying in the Mediterranean, but we'll be buying where they grow best. And as we warm in this climate, so we're buying more from, in this region, so we're buying more from this area. So for instance, we're working with Hod Medod, and we just bought their entire crop of naked barley, for instance, to produce naked barley porridge, which is quite an acquired taste, I can reassure you. And so we'll be working with producers as and when we can. But we do understand very clearly that if we want hazelnuts, Tondo Gentile hazelnuts from Piedmont are the best hazelnuts. So we go there. And that's where they grow naturally, or they grow best anyway. Does that help?
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, Duncan Farrington. I'm from a company called Farrington Oils. We do Farrington's Mellow Yellow Rapeseed Oil. Fascinating hearing to the three of you and your stories. Just going back to the question Corisande got asked about, can more farmers do this, and is that going to be a problem in competition? I don't think you want to be nervous about it, because not every farmer's going to be able to do what you can do, and your marketing, and as Nick said, you're brilliant at it, and the three of you, that's what you do for a career. But what we do, we actually get other farmers to grow the crops for us as well. We grow and produce our product to leaf mark standards. In your case, it could be organic or grass-fed beef. And actually, you add value to the other neighbouring farming businesses by giving them a premium to grow the products that you want, so that you can help sell and go to those restaurants and retailers and sell the story, and then people really do get behind it. There's a lust for well-produced food products with a good provenance.
I think that's right. And I don't think I fully answered the question here, is that would there be enough, or would... I just think there isn't enough of the top quality beef being available. So we're a long way off from being saturated, I think.
No, William.
I mean, I know what you're saying, and I completely agree, and I know your product, and it's very good. So but I'm going to perhaps be controversial and say I think every farmer earns their right to be a farmer by dealing direct with a customer, not on everything they're doing. So that's absolutely fine if they want to commit to grow oilseed rape with you, and they know you, and you have supply contracts which give them some sort of sustainability. But I think that what is wrong with farming is that too many farmers, or all farmers really, until recently, have thought that somebody else can do their sales and marketing for them. And I started my talk earlier by saying that there's no other industry in the world, so none I can think of, which starts producing things where it doesn't know who is going to buy them and how to sell them. So if I was going to start growing oilseed rape and I knew that it was all going to go to you, then that's great. That's a lot better than growing it speculatively. But for me, you have to start with Nick was saying it, you have to know who your customers are. You're very lucky. I mean, I spend most of my time with my customers in London as well, and it makes a big difference. I remember a long time ago now, I was with a friend who was a big dairy farmer in Shropshire, and I was taking him around a big Sainsbury's 20-odd years ago, and I showed him how semi-skim milk was really taking off. It was dominating the fixture, and he said it'll never catch on. And I was thinking, this is the problem. I mean, here is a guy who's producing fantastic milk, but he somehow thinks that London, the most populous city in Britain, is an example of it never catching on. And not surprisingly, he's not dairy farming anymore.
But isn't the kind of financial pressure that farmers are under, isn't it making them get more commercial? I mean, it's extraordinary. I mean, you're right when you say that people go into it, grow stuff without really knowing where it's going to go.
So the financial pressure has forced farmers to become more and more efficient producers. They are extraordinarily resilient and prepared to work on margins that no other industry would even dream of doing.
Yeah.
And nobody would lend money to any other industry, but because they've got the capital of the land prices, which defeats me on how that happens as well. But they are able to squeeze their production costs more and more, and the benefit of all of that passes on to somebody else, and that is just unsustainable.
Yeah. Well, yes.
Max Howard Farms. We have dealt with supermarkets and believe that it's that system of marketing is already there, and sometimes as farmers we think we're going to reinvent the wheel. We actually grow carrots and formed a co-op, and the biggest, most influential thing we did was actually start a haulage business, because it's no good growing carrots unless the customer gets them. And so we actually now, part of our business is haulage, and it's understanding what you produce and doing, I'm not putting this very well, but as a farmer the cost of what we produce is only a small part by the time it's on the supermarket shelf. And the cost of haulage and marketing, it's all got to be factored in. And I don't think as farmers we see all that side of it. We see the growing side, not the production and distribution.
I also would say, I mean, you're responding to what is in effect an opportunity, and you're making it efficient to take to market. I think one of the key issues that faces all of you, and indeed farmers per se, and indeed citizens per se, is in fact their relationship with food. There's a lovely story that Josiah Meldrum told me from Hodmedod. Did you know that Hodmedod began as a spin-out from a Norwich City initiative, to see if they could feed the city, what it would take to feed the city with the farms around the city. And so Josiah took some of the grain from a local arable farmer, milled it, baked a loaf of bread, and brought it back to the farmer, and he burst into tears. There is that extraordinary disconnect, and if you don't eat right, how can you farm right? Now, I'm not saying that's your story, because to my mind, I can only respond by saying you've obviously taken an effective route for your particular produce to be sure that you had continuity of the relationship. In other words, you could deliver just in time, just with exactly the right produce. But I think there's a wider issue here, which is that it's not only the consumers and the citizens have this disconnect with food, but farmers, I'm sorry to say, for the most part, I don't see the intimate relationship. And I fly around the country in an old bush plane, and I'm looking down at farms, and I'm not seeing that sense of connection with food. There's not much diversity, whether it's dairy monoculture, it's arable monoculture. I'm not seeing kitchen gardens. I'm not seeing milk cows. And I'm not coming back to some Sybaritic landscape of the past, but I am saying that nascent relationship with food needs to be rekindled.
Can I just pick up something that William said before we tracked on? Because you said what I think is very important, that the benefit passes on to someone else. And that when you look at, I'm not sure if I'm going to get these figures right, but the overall spend on food in this country is something circa 300 billion. And the spend that actually goes to the farmer is 8.7. That bit I know I'm right on. Sue can probably help. And so that means that 90% of it is swilling around in the haulage, in the packaging, in the supermarkets. That is such a disincentive, it seems to me, to the farmer, that it comes back to what you're saying. You are so far away from the person who actually buys it. And there's a joy in what Corisande does. And when you sell your eggs, and I've always thought that if you're in charge of Tesco and someone gets salmonella, and you're living in London and someone gets salmonella in North Yorkshire, well, stuff it, really. But if you're in a local community and someone's got salmonella from your eggs, you are bloody worried. So there are a million complicated things, but the money is so obvious. You're left with so little of that big cake. And
But everybody is left with so little.
Yes.
I think the gentleman who's talking about carrot farming, I think he's being very generous to the rest of the system, saying there is a cost to all of this. We have such a complicated distribution and supply system now that nobody actually makes any money out of it. The supermarkets do not make very much money out of what they do, and they have, as I said, they have a very inefficient system. Everybody is making a tiny, tiny amount, and all it needs is a bit of a wobble, and then people fall out of the system. So nobody is making money, and you're absolutely right. I do make money out of supplying my eggs to my local Waitrose, because it's 1.5 miles away, and we deliver to them on a van which is full of other eggs going thing. And so we have an inefficient system in that our hens are not all stuffed into one horrible house, and we can't feed them automatically. So in that sense, I have extra costs. But everything else I do is very efficient, and there aren't many mouths to feed. The end mouth is the person who buys them. There's Waitrose and there's us.
yeah. Corisande, do you want to say something? And
I
then
just,
we'll
we're
come
sort
to
of all saying the same thing, but the answer, one of the main answers, is local. And that's also something that we all have power to do. We all have local towns and villages and schools, and we can create the movement to supply local. As long as our abattoirs stay open.
Okay, gentleman there.
Hi, Robert Reed from the A-Team Foundation and also Rebel Kitchen in another hat. I have a question around storytelling. Do you believe storytelling to be a tool that could bridge the divide between veganism and regenerative agriculture? And if you have any ideas, how do you see that happening?
Yeah,
Well, I think that is. I have a nephew and a niece who are vegan. I have a daughter who's vegetarian. I will only succeed at Cabalver if I have their support and stamp of approval. And I think we have a bigger problem than grass-fed beef or routes to market or veganism, and that is the environment. And if we can create an authentic, passionate story about how agriculture can help the environment, is, having heard Alan Savory, is maybe the only way to help the environment. That is a way to bring everyone on board. And I'd like I've got my farm manager, he is not here today. He said when he came for an interview, said, I want to have a sign at the gate saying, vegans welcome, be impressed. And I think if we can all aim for that as farmers, we'll be, the future could be bright.
Do you want to say anything, or should we get another question? We'll get another question.
Hi, I'm Will. I'm the founder of a marketplace designed to solve some of the farmers' problems. I'm a massive fan of farm drops, sort of just in time or just when the consumer wants it model. I think their technology and their energy and the way they're doing it is fantastic. We've chosen to solve the problem in a slightly different way, which is just when we're ready kind of model. So the farmers say what they have and when it's due. It might be delayed 28 days because you'll take the orders and then the hanging process will start. But what I found really interesting here in the Oxford Real Farming Conference and elsewhere is that the farmers here and doing such great work really need to stand up and shout about what they're doing, or find someone else who's less mindful and modest, because the consumers are out there really looking for the produce that you're creating, and they're ready to hear the stories of all the great farmers, each farming differently, maybe different breeds, different location as well, but we are trying to find ways to connect the farmers together, not through the marketplace, but separately in social media, to enable them to gather together in that way, to champion each other, to build their networks, to share the great stories that they've got. And I think if I have a take home from visiting the farmers and listening to you and speaking to others, stand up and shout and tell people how great you are, and for those farmers that are don't feel like doing that, find someone to do it for you and really get the message out there, because so much amazing work is being done around the country.
It's great. Sounds great.
Sounds really good. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Joost. I'm a dairy farmer from Holland. We make cheese. I'm actually building upon the question of the guy over there.
William.
It's about storytelling, and is it so? People's spending on food have decreased over the past few decades. So what we're all trying to do is trying to find that one slice in the pizza and get it to us. Shouldn't we all try to make the pizza bigger? Because we can do that through storytelling, I would say, because when I sell directly and I tell a story, people don't even watch if they are paying 15 or 25 euros per kilo of cheese. So shouldn't every farmer then tell a story? What's your opinion on that? And thank you for the yearning about the conscious food relation, because I'm going to build an entire marketing strategy around that. Thank you.
I think farmers do have to tell their stories just like every other business, and you make the point very, very clearly. So the reason why we as a society spend less and less of our income on food is that people haven't been telling the stories. They haven't been explaining why it costs this much to buy something. So that the whole industry has been about driving prices down. And we've had a politician here today who's a farmer. And farmers are the best at making excuses and saying it's about affordable food. Well, what is affordable? I mean, if you are forcing your primary producers to produce food at below the cost of production so that they all go out of business, or they're gradually going out of business, which is supposed to be happening, then that is not sustainable. But we are terrible as an industry at explaining why it costs this much. The car industry doesn't behave like this. No other industry that deals with consumers have behaved in this way, because they explain, they justify it. They don't go out and say, sorry, our costs have all gone up. They go out and say, look, we've got new heated seats and we've got a new whatever on this model. And so everyone knows what they're buying. They know that when you're buying, well, usually we know when we're buying a well-known German brand that we're getting a better car for it. That hasn't always been the case, but actually when it hasn't been the case, there's outcry. But I mean, when I go up, and I'm sorry, I'm picking on carrots, sir, but you know, I spoke to a London audience relatively recently, and I said, you know, I don't trust the carrots that are grown around me in Suffolk because they're grown on sand, which is the soil has been stripped of its nutrients. So I don't think that when I buy a carrot, I'm getting a carrot. And the audience was full of highly intelligent mothers and their daughters, and they said, "Where do I buy a carrot that I can trust?" You know, they were really worried about it. I couldn't give them any advice. I said, I grow my own. So you can, you know, sorry, not very helpful advice, but that is the problem, is that we haven't been explaining. We don't want to tell negatives the whole time, but we haven't been explaining to customers for generations that, you know, you pay your money and you take your choice.
Right, Nick, and then Corisande, and then we're going to stop. Yes, please answer, and add anything you want to add.
I think the one point that you've made there, William, is that what you did in your expose of carrots, which, having walked through some of those fields last weekend around Albert, I am going to hold my hand up and say absolutely the nutrient profile of those carrots will be poor.
Yeah.
Now, the other point is that has created what I would describe as anxiety, and storytelling allays anxiety. And I would argue that veganism and paleo, any new insight into what constitutes a way to choose your food is based upon anxiety. Anxiety that the system is not delivering great food. And then when you have that breakthrough of understanding, you know, that the penny drops, and then all of a sudden they become enlightened consumers, conscious consumers, and therefore the marketplace is now increasingly filling with more conscious, whether it's conscious because of me, my health, whether it's conscious because of me, our planet. You know, my food, I actually came up with a great slogan today, which you can all use, which is it's my health, or it's my food, my health, our planet. And if you think about it that way, then the consciousness continues to raise, and then it pulls through into what we've just been saying, which is into what is a regenerative farming practices, producing nutrient-dense food that, strangely enough, tastes better.
Thank you. Final word from Corisande, and then I'm afraid we're going to have to stop.
I would just say that the thing that I get from stories myself, reading books, is the ability to be able to glimpse what it's like to be in someone else's shoes. And I think that's the other missing trick for farmers when we need many more people to understand what we're doing, is this: we need to open the farm gate, be traceable and say, look, this is what we're doing. And from that will follow on more understanding and a preparedness to pay a bit more.
Well, thank you all, three of you, very, very much. I've learnt a huge amount. I'm very taken. I think that's a very important thing you said about that we expect a car manufacturer to charge the hell out of us for a heated seat, but we have so degraded the process of creating food and the wonder of food that we just think it should be based entirely on the cheapest, gets the most space and everything. And that's such a fundamental thing, and I've never heard it put quite so crystal clear. So thank you, and thank you all very much, and thank you all for coming.